So I'm David Johnson, and with Katya, we are in Microsoft's organization that is accountable to digital transformation within Microsoft itself. The organization is effectively known, used to be as Microsoft IT. We're the org that transforms and manages our own infrastructure within Microsoft. And this conversation is really about what it means from an IT professional standpoint to enable self-service especially for things like Office 365 services, like Teams and SharePoint and so on. And we'll talk about what that means. The org that I'm in, I'm accountable for strategy and architecture for our Office tenancy internally. So it's everything from SharePoint and Yammer and Teams and so on. How do we put all the pieces together? How do we manage solutions? All the things we do, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And we have a large tenancy within Microsoft. Yeah, as you can imagine, we're a big company. We've got a lot of employees. We've got a lot of suppliers. In fact, we've got more guests than we have employees and suppliers combined in our tenancy. We just have a lot of people. So I meant to go here. So we'll talk about that, the fact we've got this big tenancy that we manage overall. So point is, we enable self-service for our employees. We let our employees create sites, and we'll talk about what that means in just a few minutes. But that's kind of the size, and we get so big because of the fact that we let our employees do their thing. But we're an interesting point in being an IT organization, because like you, we're kind of in the center of a lot of crossroads. We've got our employees just saying, look, get out of my way, I want to get my things done, I need to provision, I need to find a space to get my teamwork, where do I do my stuff, just help me out. Then you got the business teams. I've got Xbox telling me, hey, I want to have a partner collaboration of gaming studios and Xbox. I've got LinkedIn telling me, hey, I want to have retention policies on LinkedIn environments and teams and sites. I've got legal telling me, hey, I've got to have e-discovery in place for our environment overall. Not to mention the fact that, of course, I've got to protect the entire environment. I've got to make sure we're compliant. All the standard things I've got to do, like any other organization. So all the things I've got to deal with. Plus, like any other IT organization, I've got to be able to manage the end result, which means obviously I'm a large IT organization. I've got to be able to deal with the scope and scale to be able to manage it. So all the things we've got to deal with. Now when we think about this, there's a lot of different governance, and I kind of run a lot of governance for our own enterprise. And so when we think about governance, there's a lot of different aspects to this. Everything from how we manage solutions, how someone adds a SharePoint app to the site, or how someone adds a new app into Teams, in the internal catalogs, for example. Those are all things and processes we drive and deliver. Things like how we manage discovery and search, how we manage security and protection, how we manage change management. So how do we deal with the fact that new services come out? How do we evaluate them? How do we deploy them? How do we make sure we're comfortable with them? Those are all governance things we do to our own tenancy, just like you would with yours. We'll have a session actually tomorrow about with our service engineering partners around how do we manage our own tenancy from an operational standpoint. We'll talk about that, but we're going to focus today on the conversation around governance, around containers and basically sites, assets, stuff, things that basically we want to make sure that are available to our employees, of those teams, those groups, and so on. And so when you think about that layer, I want to just kind of bring this out that governance can be done a lot of different ways. You know, historically people had SharePoint governance, a bunch of solutions in place. But now we kind of took it down a level and we said, every modern SharePoint team site has a group. Every Microsoft Teams has a group. Every modern Yammer group has a group. Guess what? I can manage the governance of a group. Every group has a membership construct. Every group has a classification. Every group has an owner. I can therefore key off of that. I can do all the basic core governance I need to on my group object across my tenancy. And for me, that was a kind of a game changer. I didn't have to think about SharePoint governance here versus other kind of governance there. So I've got one governance solution for everything. Now that said, I still have custom solutions in place for kind of classic SharePoint and Teams and communication sites, but the vast majority of governance I can kind of centralize and manage holistically. So we're going to talk now about what that means to us to kind of manage the environment. So Katya.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Katya Gomes. I'm program manager at Microsoft, and I'm responsible for some of the initiatives related to content and container governance. And my goal today is to explain to you some of those initiatives. But before we jump into the initiatives, I would like to explain how we divide this space. We have 4 pillars. Empower employees. We will talk here about why and the initiatives related to self-service creation, why we enable self-service creation. Identify valuable content, why this is so important for us, and how we surface classification in the content and the container level. Also, some of the initiatives we have related to protect assets. We enforce policies based on classification, so that's why it's so important for us to identify content. And last but not least at all, we have ensure accountability. And that goes pretty well together with empower employees, because even though we empower employees to create O365 groups, we also have to have ways to ensure that we are holding them accountable. So we have some initiatives that we will share here. Any Microsoft full-time employee can create an O365 group. We don't have any additional provisioning layer. They utilize the out-of-the-box solution, the out-of-the-box UI. And we have two main reasons why we enable self-service creation. First, we want to empower our employees. We want to make sure that they are productive. And that's Microsoft's mission, right? That's to empower everyone to achieve more. So our goal is to start from within the company. We start from within the company, from our employees. Second, we know our employees well enough to understand that if we add friction to their processes, they will find their ways around us. They will utilize third-party applications. They will create shadow IT. We are trying to actually go in a different direction. That's what we don't want. We want to make sure they utilize the applications we support, we maintain, we control, we monitor. So these are the two main reasons why we enable self-service creation. But we do have to have a way to keep our environment clean, and that's the role of lifecycle management. We have cycles of 180 days. We start from 360, and we progressively reduced to 180, our current cycle. Every O365 group at Microsoft goes through the same life cycle. Here you can see the admin UI. You can set your expiration timeline, who is going to receive communications if the group is orphaned. You can also define if you want to apply the policy to all groups or just a set of groups in your tenant. Within Microsoft, we apply to all groups. But that we have some news coming in this space. If you want to learn more from the product team, auto-renew based on membership activity is coming, so don't miss the session identified on this slide. This is a pretty common question that we get from Microsoft customers. Do you enable external collaboration? Yes. That's a cornerstone in our overall strategy. We want to make sure our employees are inviting their partners to collaborate with us within our tenant. We don't want our content leaving the tenant because we lose control when that happens. We want our content in place. So we are trying to drive a cultural and behavioral change now within Microsoft. So we are trying to drive our employees away from sending classic attachments to sending files, to sharing links. The goal is to make sure the content stays in place.
And one thing I want to, so go ahead. One thing I wanted to add to this is, Katya noted that we have external based on the site and classification, when it's allowed versus not. But we also use things like DLP to detect and go, hey, you know what? Even if someone classified this site incorrectly, we're going to go ahead and note that this is a highly confidential project. Hey, it's a sensitive code name. It's project whatever, and we've got that labeled as something we want to trap and not let leave a company. Or this thing has a credit card number or some other sensitive pattern that DLP is detecting. So again, using the AI to detect what shouldn't happen and go out of a company. So in addition to the fact that we've got classification on when we're allowing external collaboration, we've got that DLP.
That's a good call, David. Actually, we enable by default. We disable based on classification. We have custom policies, custom application enforcing policies, disabling external collaboration if the group is, for example, highly confidential. But we enable by default. And we invite partners to collaborate with us within our teams. We enable our employees to invite them to be part of teams or to share one document. We enable them to do that because we want, as I said, we want the content to stay in place. The other direction. So now let's move to identify valuable content. As I said, this is so important for us, for our overall strategy. Here you can see the classification labels we have within Microsoft. Highly confidential, confidential, general, public. We try to keep it simple, consistent, and meaningful. The same classification labels are surfaced in the content level and in the container level. Even though I will explain more, we have different technologies currently surfacing the classification labels in those two spaces. but we try to keep consistency. So we educate our employees on the classification labels. It's very important. They recognize the classification labels, and once they see them, they know how to deal with that type of information. So once again, there are two main reasons why this is so important for us. First, awareness. We educate, and once they see the classification labels, they recognize, they know how to deal with that. Second, we can enforce policies based on classification. We have what we call label-based policies. Once the content and the container is identified, we can then enforce policies based on classification. So let's see how it happens in the content level. We utilize Azure Information Protection to surface classification labels in the content level. We also enforce policies based on the user selection. We also, as David said, we enable data loss prevention. So we scan content, looking for patterns. We communicate employees. We give them suggestions. We allow them to accept or to reject the suggestion, providing the proper business justification. So here you can see some examples of how the classification labels are surfaced in the content level. Container. We utilize a different technology for that, Azure AD classification scheme, to classify, however, the same classification labels. We keep consistency. So we utilize AD classification scheme. Once we define the classification labels on that level, the classification labels are surfaced in a consistent way because we are in an underlying construct. So once the classification labels are surfaced, they are surfaced in a consistent way. So here you can see SharePoint and Teams, they are surfacing the same classification labels. If you change, we had to go through a classification schema modification recently. Once we change in that level, and they are surfaced, and that's transparent to our employees.
Oh, and the other point I wanted to add to this one, and Katya, this is available now, right? Customers can do this today. This is not something you have to wait on. Like, we've had this container classification in Azure AD for a couple years now. So, and the nice thing is, because it's here, when you create a new SharePoint site, you see that UI, you create the SharePoint site with that label. SharePoint will collect, Teams will collect, Yammer will collect. It's all good.
Yeah, you can use that now. You can apply that now, go back and apply that now if you want. But as I said, we have two different technologies applying classification labels in the content and container levels. But the new sensitivity labels are coming. It's going to be a unified platform. The product team is going to announce that. So if you want to learn more, please attend the session identified on the slide. That's going to be pretty exciting news. As any other company, we have additional applications, custom applications enforcing policies that the product is not yet able to enforce. For example, we scan our tenant looking for orphan groups. We give the members the opportunity to take the ownership. We also enforce minimum ownership, minimum FT ownership, mandatory classification for some groups that are not classified. We also have, as David mentioned, there are some resources that are not group connected, like classic and communication sites. So we do have applications governing those types of resources. And here you can see some of the policies that we call them label-based policies. These policies, we are limiting reach based on classification, changing privacy based on classification, and also disabling external membership or external sharing based on classification. We are protecting assets based on content and container identification, as I said previously. So here are some examples of communications we send out to our employees, custom communications, giving them the opportunity to remediate, to remove violations, or even just letting them know that we took action on their behalf. So now, David, back to you to summarize and share some lessons learned.
So adding on to what Katya was talking about, let's go into a couple more details too. You know, we noted earlier that we enable our employees to create groups. Well, that's employees. We don't allow suppliers or interns or kind of temporary people to create, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we can hold our people accountable. If you're really going to enable self-service, Katya was talking about that accountability layer. It's so critical too. You want to make sure that I'm letting people I'm verifying what they've done, but I'm holding them accountable to the end result. So who can create? Well, full-time employees can create. Also, we want to make sure we've got naming group policies. People ask me, well, why aren't you using prefixing, for example? Because you can prefix groups based on, for example, maybe division or country. We purposely choose internally not to prefix our groups, because at the end of the day, if you're in Teams or SharePoint and you're doing a save as, for example, into a new group, and all your groups start with HR underscore, for example, is that a little confusing to people? Is that kind of overwhelming? So we basically said, no, we're not going to prefix in our tenancy. We do other things instead to kind of watch for where we have divisional kind of things, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But we also do things like, custom solutions like that orphan group policy as an example. So we have things like that. Plus, from a divisional standpoint, one way we work around the divisional issue is we say, if you provision in SharePoint, all those LinkedIn sites that LinkedIn wants specific branding for, and LinkedIn wants to have policies, go provision those sites in SharePoint. SharePoint, then the last step of provisioning will be a site design, which will kick off and go, here's not only the SharePoint branding for LinkedIn, for example, so the division gets what they want, but it kicks off a bunch of other scripts which basically says let's set up additional policies, like things like retention rules and sharing limits. So we do a bunch of things after group and SharePoint creation to kind of enforce some additional policy because of a SharePoint site design framework that exists as well here. So a bunch of things that we do just to kind of manage on top, but this is just a quick summary kind of all the things that we kind of think about when we think about policies for our groups. So when I think about some of the lessons here, first of all, Katya mentioned that our employees, we want to give them a way so we don't have to work around us. Because we want the simple path to be the right path. We want the simple path to be the secure path. So that's the way where we kind of deal with this. But some of this is about educating your employees, because at the end of the day, if your natural behavior is to kind of go do something else, we want to change that behavior. And later on this week, I'll have a session with a couple of my peers around how we changing collaboration within Microsoft internally. What does it mean to kind of move people away from classic attachments, for example? So those are all things we do to kind of as we think about this. Lastly, Kathy mentioned the classification scheme, and it's really important because at the end of the day, you want your employees to understand how to protect the content. And if something is classified highly confidential, or you might call it top secret, or whatever you call it, you want employees to know just by looking at it, this means don't share it. This means don't talk about it, right? So that label is so important, not just for all the tooling, but for kind of employee understanding. And that's why we want the names to be meaningful. And so we changed the legacy classification because the former names weren't meaningful enough to people. Our old schema was something like high business impact. Well, everyone would tell me, everything I work on is a high business impact because I'm a high importance guy, right? So no, that's not what that meant. But anyhow, so we wanted the classification scheme to mean something. So those are all things that we do. So, yeah, so I skipped a little bit on this one. I read the next slide. So this slide was actually about the kind of way the products fit together here. The products actually basically, many of the things Katya was talking about are things that are available today. The additional things coming are things like the label in product classification scheme to say, I'm going to automatically make a group private based on classification, or I'm going to make automatically a group, for example, turn off external sharing based on classification. All things that we do today by custom scripts are coming in product. There's still things that we do that are not, but all things we want to make sure we handle with. So, I mentioned these lessons learned already, so I won't go through this again. But point being, we want to make sure that our employees are kind of doing the thing on our tenancy as we protect them. So there's a lot of other sessions here today, and I have a couple minutes for Q&A, I think. But there's a lot of other sessions here this week around how groups and groups governance, groups management overall. Session with teams later in the week. I'll be working with Caruana on how we govern teams specifically and what that means, and how to think through your own governance policies for your stuff. There's also a lot of some good SharePoint content. Within the Core Services Engineering organization, we have a lot of other content here this week around how we're kind of managing OneDrive and known folder redirection. In fact, and Henry later on will be talking about how we do known folder redirection. There's a lot of content there. Go follow the IT Showcase link. You can see what sessions are available. You can follow us and learn more. But also you can come to visit us in the booth and talk to us and ask us more questions, because I see we're actually now running out of time. So definitely come follow us. We'll talk and help you and answer more questions around your stuff. Lastly, one of the pieces of content that's available now is how we as an organization are transforming IT, what it means to us. And so our Chief Digital Officer has his own white paper now about that topic. So a lot of additional resources available at those links. Go check them out. Tell us if you want more, because how we do it, we understand that customers tell us how we do it is important, because you can learn from us. We want to make sure we're doing it first. We can show you how we've done it. So please give us your feedback. We'd love to hear your eval, understand what worked, what didn't, and we can make it better for next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.